Good morning, everyone. It's truly an honor to welcome you all and our keynote speakers to this year's Cancer Advocacy Group of Louisiana, our NeauxCancer Conference. As Chad just said, today's about patients, families, clinicians, advocates, and really the shared mission that brings all of us together in this state, and that's improving lives in the face of cancer. And to begin a conference on a day especially centered on resilience, leadership, and purpose, we are incredibly fortunate to be joined by someone who embodies all three. I'll tell you my personal anecdote was on a panel that we were speaking for Dr. Shikha Jain, who's coincidentally also one of our keynote speakers at this conference. And our speaker always says that character is something that every leader has to demonstrate. You cannot see or witness anything and not speak up because everyone's learning from that moment. And towards the end of that panel, I had answered a question and I said this statement, so, many of you are leaders and you're gonna go back to your institutions and make this change and equity. And he interrupted me and he said, I'm sorry, Dr. Janasia, I have to tell you, any good leader has to speak up at the right moment. You said many of them are leaders. I believe everyone in this room is a leader. And I just thought that was a beautiful demonstration of really speaking and doing the things at a moment when other people are watching, if you're in any kind of position to be a leader, which we all are, every one of us. With that said, Lieutenant General Mark Hertling is a distinguished retired senior officer of the United States Army, having served for nearly 4 decades. His leadership spanned from tactical command and strategic global operations, culminating as the Commanding General of the United States Army Europe. Over the course of his career, he led soldiers in some of the most complex and high-stakes environments in the world, earning numerous military honors and distinctions for his service and dedication. In 2013, Mark was also appointed by President Obama to be one of the 25 people serving on the President's Council of Fitness, Sports, and Nutrition. But what makes General Hertling especially meaningful to have with us today is not just his leadership in the military, but his deeply human story. After his military career, General Hertling became a passionate advocate for health, fitness, and wellness, drawing from both professional experience and personal challenges. He represents resilience, prevention, and talks about the importance of taking ownership of our health. Today, he's widely recognized as a national voice on leadership, resilience, and wellness, serving as a senior analyst for CNN and continuing to educate and inspire audiences across the country. What makes his perspective so valuable to us in oncology and advocacy is this: he understands that the fight for health, much like the challenges he faced in uniform, is not just physical, it's mental, it's emotional, it's communal, and it requires leadership at every level. As we think about cancer, not just as a disease, but as a life-altering journey for patients and families, his message about resilience, discipline, and purpose could not be more timely. Please join me in welcoming a leader, a survivor, and an advocate, Lieutenant General Mark Hertling.
Well, good morning, everybody. I'm excited. You know why? Because of what Chad said. I have to tell you a couple of personal things myself, if you don't mind. I was telling Sanjay this morning, I lost our first nephew on his 1-year birthday to neuroblastoma. So I've been wanting to get, as the first time Chad and Sanjay asked me to come down here, I've been wanting to get here last year. As Sanjay said, I had another commitment. But I got to tell you, what you do is amazing. I'll just start straight out by saying that. And I appreciate all of you. We appreciate all of you and what you do. The second thing I will tell you is this is my first time back in Louisiana since 1979. I know. Most of you aren't that old, are you? I mean, you weren't born the last time I was here, but my wife and I were stationed at Fort Polk, Louisiana. We lived in a great town called Rose Pine. Anybody know Rose Pine? Nobody knows Rose Pine in here. Don't give me that. There were like 3 people in that at home. My wife is from New York, so when we were traveling from Rose Pine, we had just come from Europe, our first tour in Europe, and we had more of a culture shock coming to this state than we did going to Frankfurt, Germany. You may ask, what the hell am I doing in healthcare? Because my career in the military was as a tanker. As I was getting ready to retire, I got offered a job at a place called Advent Health And I tried to tell them that I was a tanker and not a doctor. But it was a fascinating journey into a new career and alongside a bunch of great professionals. So that was fun. I served there for 10 years, learned all sorts about it. I'll tell you some things in just a second about that. But I have to tell you a story first, that when I got there, I'll introduce the guy that told me to do this. He set me up with going around to the different directorates within Advent Health. So I was going to the cardiac unit and the cancer unit, and one day I went to the transplant. We have a transplant hospital up in Orlando, and I was going there, and this young doctor met me outside the building in his white lab coat and everything, and he says, so you're the general I'm supposed to show around? And I said, yeah, I guess so. I just want to see what you're doing. Call me Mark. And he said, okay. I said, what do you do here? We're outside the building, and he points up to the sign, and he says, it kind of says what we do here right there. It says Transplant Institute. You know, he was saying, boy, you're really a dummy. So I said, well, what kind of transplants do you do? Advent Health was the first heart transplant hospital in the country. I don't know if many people know that, but he started going into the long history, and then he says, but today, you know, we do hearts, we do kidneys, we're experimenting with hands, transplanting limbs, doing different things. And then he said, and recently we've been experimenting with brain transplants. I said, really? And he said, oh yeah. He says, it's really pretty interesting. He says, what we do is if someone has a neurological dysfunction or they're in a car accident and they have to lose brain function, we can transplant a brain now, or at least we're working on it. And I said, well, how do you get the brain to transplant? He says, we have a whole supply of them back in the hospital. He says, for example, he said, you can get a brain from a cardiologist for $5,000 an ounce. I said, really? So it comes with fees? And he goes, oh yeah. He says, you can get a brain of a family practice doctor for like $10,000 an ounce. And then he said, and plus, way back in the back in a safe, we have the brains of a general. And I said, really? I said, how much is that one? He says, well, that's $140,000 an ounce. And I'm thinking to myself, is that because generals are so smart? And I said that to him, and he said, no, not at all. He says, it just takes more generals to give us an ounce of brains. What I'm going to talk about is a little bit about leadership, because it is my passion. And you're going to have to excuse me because I keep podiums. I want to walk away, but they told me I have to say where the microphone is. Unless you can hear me here. Can you hear me? Can I wander around? Can I get down there? Great, we'll try it. I'll push that. This is my skill. Everybody hear me in that side? Okay, we good? We're actually live streaming this. So. Okay, so it's there. Sorry, my bad. Okay, I should have probably asked that question before now. All right, my story. For 4 decades, I was a soldier and had a great time doing it. And Sanjay, thank you very much for the introduction. We sat on a panel together. He didn't say where the panel was. It was at the Women in Medicine's Conference in Chicago, which I've been to every year since it started. And you haven't been attacked as a man unless you speak at the Women in Medicine Conference. So we were on the only mantle in that entire conference, and boy, did we take some heat, didn't we? And that was fun. So we've been in combat together. So for 4 decades, I was a soldier and then was recruited in 2013 when I retired from the Army from an organization called Advent Health. Great team of physicians, healthcare providers. And I won't get into the long story, but I wasn't recruited to do leadership stuff. I was recruited to do something called global partnering. And the COO came to me and he said, we know medicine really well, but we don't know how to invade other countries, so you're going to help us do that and bring our healthcare to other nations. So on one of the trips, and you can see on the bottom there, we were in Colombia, and I got to scrub up and go inside operating rooms and stuff like that, which was really cool for an old soldier. But the guy on the right with the Stetson on was the chief medical officer, a guy named Dr. Dade Warhead. And we became fast friends. Our offices were right next to each other. And every once in a while, he would come in and say, hey, how do you solve in the Army this leadership issue? And we'd have this long talk. And it was a whole lot of fun. And in one of our trips, we went to Germany, We were in my old set of quarters in Europe, and we took this picture above, a rack of deer horns. And we had seen a bunch of NCOs, sergeants, learning how to become leaders at our NCO academy there. And after that experience, he said, we've been trying to bring leadership to physicians and healthcare providers for 10 years. And every time we brought somebody in, they've rejected them. So we want you to put together a program to teach leadership. I said, okay. I said, why? And what he said was, we have these things in common. We deal in life and death. We're both part of a profession. But you do training, leadership training, we don't. He said, in fact, one of the conversations, he said, every kind of leadership we have with our physicians when they come into med school, we beat it out of them so we can teach them science of medicine. And he said, what we'd like to do is get a chance to have physicians and nurses come back to our table and help us make decisions as opposed to just making business decisions. And I was new to the culture, so I didn't know what that was all about. And it was fascinating to me that he said, could you design a program for us? So we did. And I'm going to go through that very briefly and then to get into some other things about leadership. And I hope what I'm talking with you about are some things that may resonate. Okay, so these were our course objectives, because any kind of training or any kind of teaching should have some type of objective base. I went back and presented this to them and said, this is what I think you want me to do. And it's not just the individual leadership of each physician and nurse and administrator coming together, but it's how do you build them for a future in leading their profession, not just their team, but all the way up to be, the president of some college of medicine or, a clinical society or something like that. He bought into that. And with that, we could do some very simple things. We did execution. I told him, he said, how many physicians can you train in each one of these sessions? It's going to take 6 or 7 or 8 months to do one time a month that they can give you one day a month. And I said, well, about 50. I said, that's a good class that I could teach. And he goes, oh, great, 50 doctors I can put in this course and we can get great training. I said, no, Dave, we're not just doing doctors. If you want a team sport, let's bring everybody in. So you can have doctors come in, and I would suggest you ask them all to be volunteers as opposed to assigned to this course. But we're going to bring in nurses and administrators too, so we can generate that crosstalk. And we're going to close it in a room and abide by Chatham House rules, which means you can't talk about what went on inside the classroom when you're outside the classroom. Because we're going to have some fights in here. We're going to have some back and forth. We're going to throw food at each other, and we're going to have a good time. So he bought into that. And we took these people that were in the course, the first 50 members of the course, and generated a dynamic which turned out pretty good, actually. And what we saw was some interesting dynamics that contributed to the new culture that they wanted to build within this hospital.
Why would you rate?
I'm sorry?
Sorry, the wireless way.
Oh, man. Now I can wander around? Hello? Except I probably can't go into this or it'll start screaming. So these are what research says. You can hear me now, right? Okay. What research says and what we abide by in the military there are 4 elements to leadership. A leader's competencies and attributes, the way they influence other people. They don't motivate other people. Motivation is all internal. External motivation comes by either inspiration or influence of some type. And then finally, the context of which you're leading. What kind of an organization, how big or how small is it? What kind of people are in it? What's the culture within the team? Those kind of things are part of that last element of context. That's what tens of thousands of research papers say contribute to leadership. But it's interesting, I'm going to share my military experience now. We actually have a doctrinal manual on leadership. I'm not making this up. It's Field Manual 6-22 for those interested. It's available online if you want it. And it was started to be written back in 1787 by a guy named Baron von Steuer when he worked for George Washington. In that manual, there are 3 words because 18-year-old soldiers can't remember a whole lot more than 3 words at a time. So we call our leadership model Be No Do. You follow me around? Here. Is this like a wedding where you're going to be really annoying doing that? Okay. Be, know, and do falls into these 3 categories, but each one has a description. So in the B category, you're talking about what kind of person are you? How do you define yourself? And also in that B category is, no matter how you define yourself, how do other people see you? The do category has to do with how do you see the world? What kind of intelligence do you have? What do you know, and how do you approach your daily life? The do category is really about building trust, developing others, and taking action. Pretty simple, right? See how we're building this for young 18-year-old soldiers? What I did with the physicians at Advocate Health is then expand that into a whole lot more requirements. So you can see, the B part has to do with your character, the individual character of each individual, and their presence. How do they see themselves? How have they grown up? What kind of values do they have? What's their life's mission? And then in those same things, how they see themselves may not be how other people see them too. So what you have to do is literally overlap who you think you are versus what people see you. In the no category, that's your intellect. I'm certainly not, as a dumb tanker, going to try and explain to doctors what they should know and what their competencies should be. That's up to them. But you can talk a little bit about how they see the world, how they apply that knowledge, how they communicate, how they interact with others. That's all in the intellect piece. It's their emotional intelligence along with their brilliance of mind in terms of being a great scientist. And truthfully, what I've seen in my short 10 years in healthcare is there are some really smart people in your organizations, but sometimes they don't interact very well. Their emotional intelligence just isn't there. They don't read the room more. Then finally, in the bottom, these are things that sometimes are tasked out to others, like how do you build trust? And trust comes in all different kinds of ways. How do you communicate? One of the big things in communications I found at Advocate Health was people, and by the way, the business community says that a lack of good communication in any organization will cause failure. And it's the number one reasons most organizations fail is poor communication. And what I realize is in healthcare, you guys don't talk to each other. Sorry, it's the truth. And it's not because, communication is based on a couple of things. It's based on what Sanjay says, what Mark hears, and his body language, facial expression, tone of voice when he says it to me, and also the method of communication he uses. So is it a phone? Is it face-to-face? Is it text messages? Is it emails? Is he using carrier pigeons and smoke signals? I don't care, but it's the method. And what's interesting, what I saw in healthcare, was you guys communicate in different methods. So administrators do emails, doctors do text, and nurses do face-to-face most of the time. And sometimes the wires get crossed. Is that right? Can I get a north-south head nod? Is that true? Okay, so if you start realizing that doctors never read emails, the administrators will realize why they're not getting their message through, right? If you're not on a physician's text change, you're not going to know what the hell he's talking about, right? When he goes in to see the nurse. Sanjay's shaking his head, so we know it's all right, because he's the smartest guy in the room. And he's the most cancer, too. Okay, so anyway, then you have the influence model. And I'm sorry that didn't come out right on the screen. But every leader has a task that they have to accomplish, no matter what your level in the agency. You're given jobs to do. And when you're given those jobs, you immediately start thinking, how am I going to perform that? And that's the technique you're going to use, the type of influence method, right? You with me on this model? Okay, but we've forgotten one thing. I've got this team right here, and I don't know what their motivations are. And what's your name? Elizabeth. You have a dog? Okay, good. I'm going to use the dog example with Elizabeth. Elizabeth loves me. I'm her reader. And every day she's doing everything I asked her to do. Except today, her dog died. And everybody knows what a dog's death means to a family. So she's in a real downer mood. So if I come in and I'm thinking, hey, she's going to do everything I tell her to do, and she doesn't do it, I don't understand what's going on. So I've got to understand the motivation of each person. What's your name? John doesn't like me at all. He can't stand me. But he's in this job because he knows he can go nowhere else, so he's got to stay with me. So I got to figure out what motivates John to stay in this job, and I've got to work around it. What's your name? Monica is part of the great unwashed middle. And then she comes in every day. She doesn't care what's going on. She'll do the job to the best of her ability. So I've got someone who loves me, someone who hates me, and someone who's ambivalent on my team. All teams are like that. It's the rule of thirds in leadership. You got to figure out how to influence each one of those three people depending on what their motivation is. Does that make sense? I'm trying to get through this really quickly so we can have some time for questions. Okay, then the fourth element, once you determine how your leadership style works in that one circle, you get a new job. And I didn't realize this, truthfully. Yeah, I rose through the ranks in the military. I think I did that because the Army has a sense of humor and they just wanted to see what I do next. But every time I moved from one job to another, I had different tasks and responsibilities. Sometimes in U.S. culture, sometimes in the joint world with Navy and Marines and Air Force, which is very unique. Sometimes it was a multinational environment. So all those other things, the job and the situation, the cultures of those different organizations, and my expected behaviors all changed. I didn't realize that until after I retired. I was just going from one job to the next thinking, oh, well, I'm a great leader. I'm going to walk into this one and do the same things. And you don't realize that the conditions change when you're in a leadership role. So then we started putting a course together. And what I did in separating the course was I gave them a book a month to read, which they all read because I demanded it of them. And we questioned them on it in the next lesson. So the first two lessons were all about self. They did a self-analysis. They understood, they named their values. And what I would do is ask this big audience. I was with a group of CEOs one time, and I asked them what their values were. And I won't name the company that they were with, but the initials of the company were Siemens. They could not name what their corporate values were. And it was fascinating. I said, what are your values? What do you live by? And it was like, all these CEOs and C-suite members were going, I don't know what it is. One guy finally stepped up and he said, well, we may not know them, but they're on our website. You laugh, but because I do research in organizations before I speak, I said, I know that. And in fact, you have two different sets of values on their website, so which ones do you believe in? If you don't know your values, if you don't know what you truly believe, you become a windsock. Because values help make decisions. If you're all about integrity, or if you're all about excellence, you're going to do things differently if you believe in what was in that great movie of the 1980s, Wall Street, greed is good. If greed is your values, you're going to make decisions based on greed. If integrity and honesty and contributions to your society are your values, you're going to make decisions different. So the first two lessons were all about knowing yourself and how you interact with others. The second two lessons, and those are the two books we read, were about leading others, the influence methods. Not only leading your team, but leading up. And there's, all the physicians in the room loved the title of lesson number 4, which was how to get your boss to do what you want him to do. And what they realized was they were the boss. So people were trying to lead up to them, and sometimes they weren't listening. Lesson 5 and 6 were all about leading teams, the so-called dyadic of leadership, of how do I get the lover, the hater, and the ambivalent working for me and influencing them in different ways. And then also, the organizational contributions. How do you bring that leadership dyad up to the organization so you get a seat at the table and you're influencing the decisions that your organization makes? And And then finally, the last one was leading the organization in the profession. What does it take to be a strategic leader, to go from that clinical leader up to perhaps leading as the president of the, I don't know what it's called, the College of Oncology. Is that what it's called? What's it called? There is none? Okay, what is it?
ASCO.
Okay, ASCO. I'm sorry, I didn't know that. I don't know what that stands for. And by the way, that's an acronym that you all use that I don't know, and I just went blank. Did I do something wrong? Did I punch something? Oh, great. All the IT guys are scrambling. So we're going to go right into the question and answer period. Well, wait a couple more. Hold on a sec. They're gonna fix it, I'm sure. But you can see how this all worked out. The last thing we do, which I talked our hospital into doing, is allowing me to take the 50 members of the class to Gettysburg, to a national site where crisis occurred. And the intent is not to make them Civil War button collector historians. The intent was to assign each one of them a role as a general in that battle that took place in 1863 and talk about leadership decisions. And every time they started to go off into, well, Lee should have done this and Pickett shouldn't have charged, I'd be the one to pull them back and say, okay, that's great. Thank you very much for your interest in HIPAA since the 3rd grade. But today we're talking about how does that apply to healthcare? How do you communicate that? How do you address toxic leadership? Where is your position to influence decision? How you use your values to do things. So we spent a day on the battlefield wrestling with those questions. And then we walked across the field to where Lincoln gave the Gettysburg Address 6 months after the battle, when the people of the city of Gettysburg could no longer stand all the dead bodies that were rotting in the field, and they developed the National Cemetery. And we heard the 253 words that Lincoln said during the Gettysburg Address about how you bring people together, how you don't use the vertical pronouns I, and instead use our and us and we, and build that team that he actually built during a critical time of the Civil War. That's the course. What we saw, how are we doing on the slides? Is it ever going to work again, or should I just keep riffing? Okay, good. I'll keep riffing. All right. When we left there after the first course, after we finished a year of doing this, what Dave Warren had said to me is we're experiencing, and these were his words, not mine, we are experiencing catastrophic success. That all these doctors who are in your course now want to be something different, and they want to lead the organization. So I said, my work here is done, thank you. He goes, no, we're going to do more of it. We're going to do 2 a year with 50 people in each group. So over a period of about 8 years, we graduated 1,000 endodontic physicians and administrators. And I believe it changed the culture of the hospital. And in fact, I believed it so much that as a 63-year-old, I went off to get my doctorate in business administration at a place called the Cromer School of Business. And my thesis was about physician leadership and how to create it and how to take healthcare and make them change for the better. What I found in that, and I hope I can show it to you in a second, is what I did was I went to 2 different hospitals, conducted the same course for 2 days straight at each hospital. And in one course, there were 50 doctors. In the other course, there were 50 mixed doctors, nurses, and administrators. And what I would show you, if we get this back up there, is that both groups achieved wonderful things on a pre and post-test scoring. But what I also did was I asked people around them to judge them. So each doctor provided me with a peer doctor who was not in the course, a nurse that they worked with, an administrator that was their boss, and their spouse or partner. And over that 7-month period, what we did was evaluate changes in 4 different styles of leadership. Communication ability, look at that. There's the folks at Gettysburg on top of Little Round Top. Everybody knows what a Little Round Top is, right? From your 3rd grade history class. No, you don't. Come on, don't lie to me. Okay, it's been a while. So that's the top of Little Round Cock. This was the catastrophically successful research questions that I had that I was telling you about. And I wanted to compare the all hospital or all physician group to the mixed group. So this is what we did. This was not just the expectations, but how they improved. And what you can see is in terms of the 4 areas we were evaluating them on leadership, the mixed group achieved greater results by a significant margin over the homogeneous group of doctors. But what was really cool was here's the changes, and what the bottom of the chart says is SR stands for basically their self-rating. So this was their self-rating in each group. So both of them improved about the same, but the mixed group improved a little bit better. This was their peer physician and their nurse peer as well. The doctor one is on the right and the nurse one is the next one over. And then interestingly enough, here's the spouses and partners. I didn't expect this truthfully, but I was suggested by my thesis advisor, throw spouse and partner in there and see how they appear to themselves at home when they're away from the office. And what was interesting is you see that the mixed group had a significantly larger improvement than the homogeneous group. And it was because we concluded that the homogeneous group were just talking among themselves. They had become self-licking ice cream cones. The other group was actually talking to those who didn't agree with them. And they were getting feedback that helped them improve. So that was the bottom line. Across the board, significant improvement, better communications in the teams, stronger teamwork within the hospital. And then the last one was fascinating because this came out, one of the hospitals I was working with was in Chicago, it was Amita Health. And the chief medical officer said, hey, we've had 3 physician suicides in the last 6 months. And so we're experiencing significant burnout. Could you put a couple of questions in on burnout and see how they address themselves? It wasn't part of my research study, and as any of you who've gotten a doctorate know, you don't want to add things to your research, but I did it because they were paying me to do it. And what we found was there was a huge reduction in self-reported burnout. And my thesis advisor, a young woman by the name of Kim Yentz, PhD, who's big into evaluating this stuff, she said, my dad was a doctor, and I think the reason that improved was because they felt closer to the organization, closer to the members of the team, and they became more resilient as their work went on. And since then, I've done another study with a guy named Dr. Lee Scheinbart, who has used the same class to determine that there's a greater affiliation with their organizations when they go through these courses. So they're more loyal to their organization. Now, again, I'm sorry that this didn't show up the right way, but some things I've learned about leadership, and then I'll stop. Take a look at that picture. That's Sergeant McGreevy. He was one of my soldiers who had just parachuted into northern Iraq in 2003. Tell me what you see in that picture. A lot of equipment. He's overloaded. Soldier's load. He's carrying about close to 130 pounds of gear in his rucksack, his food that he's carrying with him because he's going to be on the ground before he gets resupplied for about 3 days. So he's got 3 days worth of food in his rucksack. He's got his blanket. He's got all kinds of ammunition. He's dirty and muddy. What else you see? He's tired. He's beat. He's probably, he landed at 8 o'clock in the morning. He had been up since 2 o'clock when they were preparing the aircraft to go over and they parachuted out. See anything else? Yeah, maybe. God and country, I'm sorry. Say again?
He's alone.
He's alone. He's not, really. There's a bunch of soldiers around him, but he looks like he's alone. And why is that? He's carrying a lot. Not just on his back, but in his mind. He's thinking about his wife and 3 children back in Vicenza, Italy. He's a sergeant, so he's thinking about, am I going to deliver for my team? He's thinking about success or failure. This is the first time he's been in combat, so he's got that fear in his heart. There's a lot of things going on, and it all has to do not with the gear he's carrying, but the look on his face. And that gets back to what leadership is all about. It's about the individual and knowing which member of the group are doing things for different reasons and why they are motivated to do those things. A couple things that I saw. Your values are the most important. That top picture is me talking to a guy named Colonel General Shenko, he was the commander of the Russian army. And that picture was taken in 2011, so it was before they invaded Ukraine. And it was after I gave him a tour of U.S. Army Europe. And previous to that, he had given me a tour of the Russian army in various bases over there. And everything I saw on my tour was a demonstration. It wasn't trained. They were trying to impress me. When he came to Europe, I told him, hey, Colonel General, what do you want to see? Because here's my training schedule. We'll go anywhere you want to go. And I didn't have a plan. I just took him places. And he saw young people doing masterful things just like you see in your places of business every day. And at the end of the tour, we were sitting in the airport, and he hit me with a question. He said, how do I make my army more like yours? That's why I've got that dumb look on my face, like, how am I going to answer this? And I said, General, you're not. Because you don't have leadership, you don't have sergeants, you don't have lieutenants who are worth a damn, and your colonels are all fat. Because they were, everyone I saw, and they were more interested in drinking vodka than training their troops. The picture at the bottom is of Dr. Elmira Mansfield, who was in my very first class, and she said, hey, Mark, after the class was over, she goes, you want to come down and round with me? And she was an ED doc, or she is an ED doc, she's now a CMO of the hospital. She said, you want to round with me in the emergency room at Celebration Health, which is right across the street from Disney, and they get some strange people in that emergency room. I said, yeah. I said, how long will it take? And she goes, well, you're going to round with me, so you're going to be there the whole shift, 12 hours. It's great. So I watched this young lady, this young doctor, for 12 hours do her thing back in 2014. And she was awesome. She was unbelievable. Everything that we had taught in the class, she had demonstrated, and the way she treated different people, the way she broke into, and she's fluent Spanish speaker, she's from Puerto Rico, when she broke into Spanish with the Hispanic patients, when she tried to speak Romanian to a Romanian patient who would cut her foot open over at Disney World, and it was just awesome. But she was showing her values, just like you do. She cared. She wanted to make people better. So, knowing your values, constantly assessing your character, reflecting on yourself. By the way, that's what my book is all about. It's reflections of life. And ensuring each other see your presence. Listen more, talk less. I'm a big Hamilton fan. Anybody seen Hamilton? I can rap the entire soundtrack. Who doesn't believe? How does a bastard, orphan, son of a whore, and a Scotsman dropped in the middle? See, I told you right there. I can do the whole thing. All right, great, man. I'll be around all day. Great. The issue is you intimidate people. Leaders intimidate people. Whether you admit it to yourself or not, you do. I have a special problem because I'm tall. I really intimidate people, but friendliest guy you ever want to meet. Right, Sergeant? There you go. Okay, I got a amen, brother. So what I'm talking about is understand that you intimidate as leaders, no matter what your role is or what level you're leading at. People don't want to talk to you, so you got to draw it out of them. You got to get them to say things. You got to listen more, talk less, which comes from Hamilton. Learning cultures. I mentioned Sanjay and I were at the Women in Medicine Conference. If you're a man and you want to learn another culture, go to that conference. Oh my God, they are awesome. But you learn things about them that you don't know. They had a group a couple years ago, I don't think it was the year we were there together, but they had a bunch of female Swedish surgeons who came and talked about how sexual harassment in the Swedish medical community was off the charts, such that they had organized something that was called the Swedish female nurses or female doctors or something. So that group over there on the right was the third class or physicians that we taught. We gave them a white course at the end of the leadership program. And they asked me to come over and take a picture with just the women in the course because they said, you understand us. And I tried to convince my wife of that. She wouldn't buy it, okay? On the bottom, that's a group of people that President Obama formed his fitness council with. It was fascinating because there were 12 members of that council, and they represented all sorts of physical capabilities. I was the only military guy on there, but if you look deeply at that picture, you see Allison Felix, the Olympic 9-time gold medal winner. You see Anthony Robles with the crutches. He was a Division I wrestler at Nebraska without a leg, and he won the national championship, born without a leg. You see Alonzo Mourning in the back and Jason Collins, a couple of basketball players. You see Dennis Cleveland, who was a Cleveland Indian second baseman who had no hearing since birth, but he still played professional baseball for 3 years. And then you saw, on the right with the right coat, that's Misty Copeland, ballet dancer. And I didn't know anything about ballet, go figure. She talked me into going to one of her ballets. It was awesome. Talk about the athletic capabilities. I mean, I still don't get ballet, how they do it, but it was pretty cool watching. So learning other cultures and immersing yourself in what other people do is kind of fascinating for leaders. Oh, that other picture, by the way, is me capping a keg in Germany during the 4th of July, because we had a big party at my house in Germany, and there was a bunch of Germans around. They wanted me to tap a keg. Has anyone in here tapped a keg? I mean, a real, wooden keg? It's an art form, and you don't want to piss off Germans by screwing it up. And I hit that keg, or hit the tap too hard, and beer was everywhere. And I lost all kinds of credibility when I did that. You don't mess with beer in Germany. All right. Wade in the crowds. This was a picture taken in Iraq in 2007, where I was trying to put myself between a bunch of Iraqi soldiers and the local citizens that were all really pissed off. And you can see off to the right, I've got a couple security guys, and they said, boss, don't go in there. This is not safe. But there are some times as a general where you got to go places you really don't want to go, and you got to wade into crowds just to get the feel for things. Wander around, do different things, escape what you're being asked to do, and just experiment with other things. The middle picture, the picture on the left is a guy surrendering his sword to me in Iraq. He changed from being a terrorist to being a supporter. It was the weirdest thing I've ever experienced. Me on the right is teaching in my MBA class. That's the Iraqi police when I told them we were going to start including women in their police force. The guy freaked out on me because that's not what their culture does, but by introducing women in their police force, we basically thwarted our cell of female suicide vest wearers because the men weren't searching them, the women were. The one in the middle is me overwatching one of our cardiac surgeons doing a valve transplant, and the one on the right is me on Morning Joe a couple weeks ago, where it's an interest. When you get a soldier in the middle of a bunch of journalists, it's sometimes hard. But the one I want to point to is the one in the middle on the top. That's Robin Williams, the late Robin Williams. He was over on a USO tour when we were in Iraq, and we were talking in a kitchen. And he asked me if he could stay longer than the USO tour. He says, "Can I just travel around with you for a while?" And I thought, oh, great. I got the world's best comedian traveling around in a combat zone. He was fascinating because it was a completely different persona. He wanted to know what was going on in war. And it was amazing. He was with me for 3 weeks. And it was kind of fun having him as a friend. And he was a terrific individual. God bless him for taking his own life. Bring rigor to your meetings. I got on President's Council for Fitness because I met with Mrs. Obama as we changed all of basic training to do different physical stuff because we were experiencing the young people that were coming into our military were not prepared for the demands of combat. So we had to change our physical training program. She saw a newspaper article about it and came down to visit. And her crew said, her chief of staff at the time, Valerie Jarrett, told me on the phone, she goes, she's only got 20 minutes to get a briefing. Don't take any longer. You got to make some points with her. That briefing lasted 3 hours in terms of what we were telling her about. Not because we set it up that way, but because she kept asking questions about the state of our nation's youth. And at the end of it, she said, I'm going to call you back to be a member of the Fitness Council. I said, Ms. Obama, I'm sorry, I'm an active duty soldier. I can't do that. I got to be apolitical. And she goes, well, when you retire, we'll pull you back. The week I retired, I got a phone call on the beach in New Smyrna. She said, could you be on the Fitness Council? And we became sort of fast friends. She's pretty cool. Seek new adventures, learn and grow every day. I already talked about the Fitness Council. That picture at the top, I got a call from one of my commanders who was in Netherlands when I was commanding Europe, and he said, hey boss, you want to come up for midnight mass and go to mass in a cave? I said, what? And he said, yeah, I'm gonna do it. Am I still okay? Yeah, okay, a couple more minutes. And he said, yeah, we go to mass in a cave at the Shark Monastery. I think you'll really enjoy it. Well, my wife and I went up. That's her sitting next to me. And she said, when we got there, what we found out is this cave in 1944 is where a bunch of soldiers went to mass before they were called up the next day on Christmas Day to fight in the Battle of the Bulge. And if you look over on the right there on the wall, there's like a plexiglass. Behind that plexiglass is everyone's signature. It was all the American signatures that were there that night. There are 273 signatures on that wall. 204 of them were killed in combat the next day. And every year since 1944, the Dutch conduct their Christmas Eve Mass as a commemoration in this little cave. It's a sandstone cave. The priest, he's not shown, but the priest giving the Mass, I've got another picture of him, was 88 years old, and he was telling me about that night and the confluence of fear on the American side and joy on the Dutch citizen side because they had been liberated, and what happened to those Dutch citizens when they found out that all those soldiers that they had come to know at that Mass were killed the next day. So there's a cemetery right down the road from here called the Netherlands American Cemetery, and most of those soldiers are buried in that cemetery. And what happened was all of those graves are adopted. 8,000 graves in that American cemetery are adopted by Dutch citizens, and they take care of them on a daily basis, the gravesite. It's fascinating. And then that last picture I'm going to give you that's Rhonda Bartlett. She was my mentor when I got my doctorate. And when I came in as a staunchy old colonel, or a staunchy old general after I retired, and I said, what am I going to get out of this doctorate program? She said to me, you're going to learn how much you don't know. And she was absolutely right. Last word, mentor young people, grow your team. The young lady on the left holding the coin was my aide de camp as a major. She was my last aide de camp. Her name is Stephanie Bagley. I was called into a meeting with the Georgian president when he thought we were leaving Europe back in 2012. That's President Saakashvili. He called me into his office and he says, are the Americans going to leave us here to Europe to ourselves? This was after he had been invaded once by the Russians. I said, no way. But when I went into that meeting, I said, can I bring my aide with me? So she's sitting at the table you see her with her hair out. That's her as a young major. And I think bringing her into that meeting and seeing how politics work drove her career to be a foreign area specialist. She is now a brigadier general, and she's the defense attaché in Israel. Masterful person. Last thing. Tell people you love them daily. Find a way to say thanks. And the best way to do it is write it down. Don't send an email, don't send a text message, write it down. Because you'll find when you write it down, they will take that note and pin it to their tarot or pin it to their office wall because it means so much to them. Some will send it home to their parents, and they have it framed over their Arco lounger in their living room sometimes. But the fact that you're writing it down says so much more in today's society than just giving a pat on the back and saying thanks a lot. Thank you for having me. I don't know if we went all purpose.
Yeah, you want to schedule? Thanks. No, I don't. I'm gonna go to next.